Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
All right. Hello, everyone. Yes, Francesco, I'm recording that. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's with special excitement that I'm pleased to welcome Tristan Morgan to our 12th Architalk today. So this is the second of our online versions, which is quite exciting. Tristan is the National Design Technology Innovation Lead of COX Architecture and an active member of the COX Futures Committee, COX Research Working Group, and coordinates COX National Computational.
Tristan.
Hey, Nat. I think we lost Parisa.
It'll disappear in a second.
Maybe I should just get started while Parisa's coming in.
Yes, Tristan, I think it's a good idea. I think we started and you could start sharing your screen.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. So, hi everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Parisa invited me to speak, and I said yes immediately. I'm going to talk about, I guess, something that's really exciting to me and really close to what excites me the most about architecture, I guess. So I think Parisa was just giving an introduction, but yeah, I think she was just about to say that I also chair the computational design, or I coordinate computational design at COX as well. Hi Parisa, sorry, I just thought maybe we'll just keep going, if that's okay. Oh. All right, I'll keep on going.
Yeah.
So I'll start sharing my screen. So a little bit of, I guess, this presentation is new. So this is a new one. So I haven't actually delivered this in its entirety yet, but it's about something that I think I've been thinking about for a long time, and it does drive my approach. It's called basically Reconfiguring Architectural Practice, and it's about future technological frameworks for architecture, engineering, and construction. So it's really about thinking about what's happening in the future and where we're going, and how we might get there, really. A little bit about me, see if this all works. Fantastic. So, and I think this is kind of important as well in terms of when I think about where I am now versus where I thought I would be, particularly when I finished my studies and graduated. I kind of, I had that sense that there was a single path in a way, that you graduate, you get, you become an architectural graduate, you move into practice, you design buildings, you get registered, all that kind of stuff. But then things changed. So the GFC hit in 2008 when I was just starting my career, and I ended up back in academia. I ended up doing teaching, I ended up doing research, and over time I developed a completely different approach to design and the profession entirely than I even imagined was possible, which ends up with me where I am now, which is I do research and innovation for COX Architecture, a large commercial practice, certainly not something that I, in my kind of early days, I thought I would have ended up doing. And I also enjoy and spend a lot of time teaching, and I get a lot out of it. So I'm currently a casual academic, both at Curtin and the University of Western Australia. And I guess I wanted to kind of outline that because when we think about the future and when I think about the future, it's very easy to become, in a sense, seduced by a certainty of things, or the idea that you can predict things and then you can plan for these things in a more certain way. But what happens in reality is, things get thrown up, things that you might not necessarily be prepared for. And so the image that you have of, and I think it's speaking as a, in a kind of students, in a sense, the image that you have of your career today is not going to be much like, it won't be in the future much like you think it will be. So, I think that's exciting. And I guess what I want to really talk about is, well, how do I approach that, and how do I continue to embed in my practice that kind of thinking about the future and excitement for the future and preparing for the future. So in my role as innovation lead, this is kind of what I do more or less. So I'm an idea finder. I am an innovation scout. I manage ideas. I am in charge of continuous improvement. And the things that excite me most about it, I do innovation strategies, and also I like to think of myself a little bit as a futurologist. So in a sense, this idea that I'm always thinking about what's next and what the next step is. And something that I always keep is this idea that you don't know what you don't know. So it's very hard sometimes to know what you need to be thinking about, what you need to be focusing on, if you just don't know what the lay of the land is, or you haven't come across it yet. And I just always kind of bring myself back to that idea. And that also means that you can't be so certain in your current understanding of the world, right? So what you understand about everything today is not necessarily what you're going to understand about everything tomorrow. And I think that is really important for me in the way that I approach innovation. I also think about things, a couple of key kind of statements and key people that also help to kind of frame and assist me in thinking about things. So Cedric Price, an architect who some of you may know, who was very adept at combining kind of technology and cutting edge technology of the day with his architectural practice in both kind of mostly in speculative ways, but in very grounded ways as well. I mean, he said, technology is the answer, but what was the question? And that's important for me because it's very easy to be seduced by technology, by the promise of technology, but it's also important to understand, well, what is the answer? What was the question? What is it answering? What kinds of things is the technology offering to us, and does it actually connect with the questions that we do really have? I also think about Philip K. Dick, do androids dream of electric sheep? What does the technology know? How does it work? How does it think? What assumptions are embedded in the way that it works that we kind of need to understand, or at least think about, if we're going to best leverage it for what we do? Also, I think about the work of Liam Young, who is an architect, but also a speculative architect, and he is more of an author and a film director these days. But he's been running a practice called Tomorrow's Thoughts Today for many years, and he now teaches a speculative fiction course at SciArc. But his film from 2017, Where the City Can't See, is really interesting to me because he tried to reimagine the city and urban environments from the point of view of the kind of machinic sensors that we're seeing more and more in the world. So in this case, autonomous vehicles, surveillance systems, all these kinds of things. And he kind of created a bit of a provocation about, well, how is the world being rebuilt or re-understood through these new means and these new methods of understanding? And what does that do to change the way that we as people in these spaces, how do we now relate to them? And what is the negotiation between that? And again, that comes back to this idea, well, what is the negotiation that we always go through when we do work with technology and we also work with physical architectural space? And finally, a really important thing that I always try to make sure I think about is this idea of learning from the past to design a better future. And this is basically almost like the core kind of value in the work of Philippe Bloch out of ETH Zurich, who for the last couple of years has been passionately talking about how he, as a structural engineer and architect, but how we can learn from the past, learn about the types of materials and the types of approaches to design that were used in the past, and how we can actually use them in more effective ways using our technology. So for him, it's not about this kind of pursuit of technology or pursuit of innovation for the sake of it, even though he's one of the, he and his research group are some of the best innovators in the world. But it's actually about making sure that that innovation is being done to provide a better built environment, and in a sense, understanding how we might be able to do more with less. So in this case, what he talks a lot about, and what I find really fascinating, is it's not about better performing materials or high performing materials. It's more about how can we better understand the materials we already know and use them much more effectively, rather, you know, in I guess in a sustainable way, I guess. So it's all driven, I guess, by that sense of sustainability. But I think that's also a really important thing to think about. So then I think, you know, in terms of approaching my job and my role, and you know, managing innovation and I guess being relied on in a sense to understand what's happening in the world of technology and architecture technology, where things are going, and then how to best implement it and integrate it into practice day to day. A couple of things are really important to think about. So what do we know? Where do we want to go? And how can we prepare? So I think these questions kind of drive that approach to innovation. So what do we know? For me, there are a few things that I know, and that, you know, history is important to understand. So in terms of design technology, and as a technologist, I understand that 60 years ago, this is how, you know, we as architects did the work. You know, this is how we delivered buildings. We used drawing boards, very analog means. Still recently, we're still doing similar things. Bunch of people working together, collaborating, using computers, of course, but kind of thinking and operating in much the same manner. But at the same time, we've got this emergence of three-dimensional kind of design technology. So in this case, this is Frank Gehry's Bilbao Guggenheim, one of the first projects ever to actually integrate advanced 3D modeling into its design process. In this case, it was early versions of CATIA. And we also know that this kind of stuff is happening as well. So we know that we're seeing more robotic fabrication, more technology coming in, but we also know that people are still involved as well. So I think this is kind of important. So these are things we know. We also know about the history of computer-aided design. We also know about what's happened since it kind of was first being thought about and developed by Ivan Sutherland in the early 60s. We understand that in the early 70s at the Architecture Machine Group, Nicholas Negroponte, who later went on to found Wired magazine, was developing really complex, really sophisticated computational modeling processes using kind of semantic understanding. And this is in the 70s. Revit, of course, has changed things and has become one of the primary kind of interfaces for how we design, but that's 20 years old as well. And we also can trace that development to where we kind of are today, but you know, even this is now business as usual. So computational design, you know, scripting, complex geometries, NURBS, all that kind of stuff. So those are things that we kind of know. That's our history, that's the past. But that can start to build, I guess, a platform for thinking about the future. So what is the future? Well, in fact, a lot of what we think about the future is actually the present. So cyber physical systems like digital twins, things like that. That's not the future, that's the present. We're doing that today. And it's all built on knowledge and technology that has been around for decades. It's finally emerging, but it's been a long time coming. Roboticized construction. This is not new. This is not the future. This is actually the present. This is happening today. Boston Dynamics have had this spot robot in development for over a decade now, and it's actually on market. It's there. It's happening. I've been recently doing some design studio work in collaboration with Woodside. They've got these robots. They're using these robots on sites in remote operations today. And in fact, this robot, this spot robot, it's called Spot. This is, there are more advanced robots that they're using already. New interactions. So things like VR. This isn't the future. This is happening today. So this software, this is Archio. This is a startup that are developing this incredible approach to using VR to model. And actually, I've used it. I've been testing it. It's incredible. It works. So this is happening. This isn't sci-fi at all. And then finally, the thing that is happening right now is this kind of ubiquitous access to knowledge, ubiquitous access to expertise via kind of platforms, web platforms. I guess they're kind of collaborative platforms that don't require you to be an expert to access really really advanced information. So this stuff, it's not what's happening next, it's actually what's happening now. So where do we want to go? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve in architecture as professionals in the built environment? This is what I think. Other people may think other things, but I think where we're trying to get to, we're trying to talk about net zero, we're trying to talk about using less energy. We're hopefully moving towards more equity and equality in design, and I take that to mean we do a lot of I do a lot of technological development. I do a lot of R&D. Often that R&D is geared towards satisfying particular types of clients. I'd like to think that more ubiquitous access to that kind of information and that kind of knowledge means that we can actually more equitably distribute it to the world, I guess. More hyper-performative design, so buildings that just do more with less. We're also, I think, looking towards circular and regenerative design, understanding materials, understanding supply chains, understanding how buildings are actually part of a larger system. Empathic spaces, making sure that things are responding to the needs of the people that are going to inhabit them, and smarter cities. And we talk a lot about smarter cities, and there are lots of assumptions about those things. Often the discussion about smarter cities, I find, seems to veer towards empowering, I guess, authorities to monitor and control populations, whereas I think smarter cities can be more about how does a city actually become smarter in itself to respond to, in a proactive and supportive way, the wishes, desires, movements, kind of changes of the people within its kind of space. So a city might actually understand how people move through it during the day, and better apportion servicing. So maybe it's power, maybe it's waste management, all that kind of stuff. A city might become smarter in a way that supports the people who live in it, rather than just as a way of monitoring their behaviours. And I guess the next thing that is really important for me is thinking about how we can be prepared for these futures. How do we, if we know we want to get somewhere, how do we get there? What's the plan? And this is really where the idea of being an innovation strategist comes in. You can have fantastic wishes, desires. You can even be building up really fascinating and seductive images of a perfect future. But you've got to figure out how to get there. And to get there, it actually needs to be practical, it needs to be tangible, And pragmatically, people need to be able to understand it, buy into it, and see outcomes from the investment that needs to be made in that. So what I like to employ are some techniques of, I guess, strategic foresight. And what strategic foresight does is it gives me a framework within which to operate. So rather than imagining things and kind of trying to figure out how to get there, I can employ a framework which helps me to better plan and strategize for the future. And the framework that I find works really well is this VUCA framework. So if we think about the future, we probably all agree that you can't predict the future. We're none of us are fortune tellers. So, there's a folly in trying to predict the future. However, we can accept some certainties about what the future. The VUCA model tells us that we need to accept that there's volatility, that there is uncertainty, that there is complexity, and there is ambiguity. So the future is all of these things. So we need to understand, we need to accept that this is the case. You can't be 100% certain of anything. But what you can do is you can identify agents of change. And in the case of the built environment and the field in which we operate, you identify them under three categories. The first category is turbulences. So these are things that kind of ever present, but will always have an impact. And I guess ever present within, I guess, a horizon of understanding. So climate crisis, sustainability, regenerative design, all that kind of stuff. Finite resources. To make things, we need to extract things. We need to harvest things. So, there's a finiteness to that, and that is something that we actually need to acknowledge. And also population growth, in the sense that growing populations around the world require housing, they require services, all these kinds of things. So these are things that are always going to make things complicated, basically. We also understand and can identify some game changers. So these are things that we can clearly identify inflection points in which they have changed the way things are, and those changes are still being felt. So be it Internet of Things, smart sensors, Alexa, Google Assistant, all that kind of stuff. They're changing the way that we relate to the spaces around us, the ways that we relate to each other, that we exist within communities. BIM, computational design. Computational design for me changes the way that I can understand information and understand design. Digital fabrication, automation, persistent surveillance, and I think let's just kind of with that. And big data is another one. And then the final thing are these things called wildcards. And so a wildcard is something you can identify that might not be having that massive change yet. There might not be a seismic shift that it has caused, but you can kind of understand that if it works, if it becomes embedded in the way we do things, it will change everything. It will be a huge driver of change. So artificial intelligence, it's kind of hovering around. I think people are developing lots of fantastic proofs of concepts and prototypes of certain ways, but it's definitely not being adopted in practice largely. But if it does, it will change everything. The way that we design, the way that we interact with our machines, the way that we interact with technology in the construction site, the way that we plan projects, it will all be changed in a huge way. Augmented reality and virtual reality. I mean, I showed just a second ago some of the tools that are working in that space, but again, they're fringe. But if they become business as usual, again, it will change the way that we do things. It will be a massive change. And as we've seen over the last 5 months, things like pandemics, things that suddenly and without warning can become real and suddenly change everything. The discourse of how we talk about workplaces and public spaces, society, it's changed in a very short time, and that then means that we need to re-strategize for what we're doing in the future. But what understanding all that does is give us a bit of a model of how we might then prepare for the future. So there's this thing called the cone of plausibility, which I like to employ, which basically tells us that if we know the past, so we know what we know the present, so we understand what's happening today, we can build we can build basically a model or several models of what the future might be. So in this case, the past and the present give us a limit of evidence and a limit of interpretation, which then become a limit of plausibility. So we kind of start to define a bounds for where in which we can start to imagine the future, because we understand the past, we understand reality. I guess we're not working in the dark and imagining things with no basis. We've got a grounded understanding of where things are going to be. And then we can start to imagine alternative futures. Some of them might be alternative futures that we don't really want, but they're within the cone of plausibility, they're just as likely as any other alternative future. We can identify an expected future. So if things go the way that they're going, this is where we're probably going to end up. And then we might even identify a preferred future. So a place where we would like to be. And if we establish what these futures are, we can work backwards and we can start to build a strategy and with steps along the way to get to those futures. So in terms of design in the built environment, this type of strategy has actually been used a lot. As an example, just the end of last year, Arup published a report called 2050 Scenarios for Plausible Futures. And they actually used the VUCA and cone of plausibility foresight model to establish 4 potential futures for us, humanity. But the reason that they did this was because it gave them a sense of what might be coming in the future. It enables them to now understand how their business might need to work in the future, where to resource things, how to plan, and also how they're going to provide services for their clients. So this becomes a very powerful model of understanding how you actually plan and develop your business in the future. We've also got UN Studio engaging in this. They're trying to understand what the future of architecture might be, again, through a strategic way. It's not just about imagining some fantasy world, it's actually understanding, well, where are things going to end up and how are we going to make sure that we are part of that future? What services do we need to offer? What services do we have now that we can offer in that space? Or what services do we need to develop? What people do we need to hire? We have to, it enables them to start thinking about all those kinds of things. And US Studio has been doing it for a couple of years. They've got a division they call Futures, but they've also got a knowledge division. They've got a spin-off company called UN Sense, which actually develops technology and engages with policy and all kinds of things. So strategic foresight is a really big part of them. Even though they're an architectural practice, it's actually a really big part of them being prepared and being resilient. And even at COX, we're doing this as well. So we have a Futures Committee, and last year at the AGM, we delivered a report which outlined 3 futures of 3 scales and tried to position our organisation in those futures. And it's a really important part of business strategy, because it gives us a sense of where we want to be as an organisation, whether it's the right place or whether it's a place we would rather not be, and what it means to get there. And if you can kind of understand where you need to go, you can start to build up the plan of how you're going to get there and what you need to start doing today. And I guess we envisaged an organisation that has architecture at its core still, but starts to engage with a vast array of other types of service offerings that are things you would traditionally associate with architecture, but also things that you might not necessarily associate with architecture, but become very valuable in the types of futures that we were imagining. So when I think about imagining the future, you don't just think about it in isolation. this book is fantastic. It's a book by Susskind and Susskind. It's called The Future of the Professions. What I like about it is that it positions architecture as another profession alongside other, alongside a lot of other professions, and it sees it as susceptible to impact from technological change as any other profession, which I think is really important. And what Susskind and Susskind say about the future of architectural practice is that, or what I kind of gather from it is that it's transdisciplinary. So it's got lots of knowledge operating within it that's not necessarily defined by what you consider architectural knowledge. It's value and values driven. So the idea is that in an increasingly automated world, how you ascribe value to your labour or your services changes. It's not as simple as multiplying hours by labour cost. It becomes starting to actually understand what value you provide as a professional. And then of course it's values driven as well. So clients in the future are looking to designers, architects who have values that they wish to reflect their own values, or that reflect their own values, or reflect values that they aspire to have. So it's becoming really important. And what it means is that as a practitioner or as an organisation, you need to actually start thinking about what your values actually are and how you offer them to clients. It's going to be increasingly automated. We know this, and it's also going to be, according to Susskind and Susskind, increasingly task-based. So rather than this idea that you have, I guess, this kind of a profession that you call a profession, you actually start to parcel out bits of that profession that are most important to particular tasks. And the tasks that you might need, or the skills that you might need to have to undertake certain tasks might actually be, you grab a bunch of skills from this traditional profession and a bunch of skills from this profession, rather than one holistic or singular kind of traditional profession as we've previously seen them. But I guess fundamentally, what Susskind and Susskind say about the future of professions is that it's going to be different to what it is today. And I think that is irrefutable. So what is transdisciplinarity? Well, it's not a new term, and there was a Charter of Transdisciplinarity authored in 1994, though the Institute of Transdisciplinarity has been around for a long time. But what it says is that transdisciplinarity complements traditional disciplinary approaches. So it doesn't supersede them. It doesn't obsolete them. Traditional disciplines don't become obsolete. It also enables the emergence of new data and new interactions at the encounter between disciplines. It offers a new vision of reality. It does not strive for mastery of several disciplines, but aims to open all disciplines to that which they share and to which lies beyond them. And in my opinion, a transdisciplinary practice is one that is most suited to confronting the wicked problems that we have in the future, or these VUCA problems, that is, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous future problems. So transdisciplinarity, very briefly, is this idea that when you have singular disciplines, they themselves have their own limit of plausibility that are informed by their own understandings of the world. And in between each discipline, you have these gaps. When you start to work in an interdisciplinary way, these gaps start to be covered. However, the opportunity starts to emerge, but sometimes this opportunity is still a long way away. It's sometime in the future, because you still need that this code of plausibility to open up over time to enable these cross-pollination of ideas. What transdisciplinarity suggests is that if you bring all this disciplinary knowledge together and you transcend those boundaries on the outset, you open up opportunity, and it becomes an exponential kind of cone of plausibility, and thus grows the opportunity and and it's I guess a much better use of all these disciplinary knowledge at once. So I think there are several things that a transdisciplinary practice engages with. First, and this is kind of my background, is design competence. So the idea that as a computational designer, you are developing these systems that augment and assist other designers in doing certain things. So in this case, this is just some of the basic capability that we have at COX. Front-end design support. We do feasibilities. We give feedback to designers about the impacts of their design schemes. We also, for example, a project that I was working on last year called the Opportunity Pavilion. See, it's an incredibly expressive structure, very sculptural form. And what computational design enables us to do is to rationalize this form, is to understand it, is to completely unpack it, and start to understand it as collections of relationships and data. Not because it's fun to do, because it can be fun to do, but because that's really important to controlling it and communicating the design intent to the digital tools that we use. And in the case of a project like this, it becomes a really important part of ensuring that it's deliverable. So the design model was developed in a very sculptural way. And so what you had effectively was a ribbon that was eccentric, so made up of multiple curves that weren't really rational, but they were kind of beautiful. And part of what I did on this project was to rationalize that all down into 2 or 3 different arcs and a couple of straight lengths that were directly connected to material logic and logic that was, into kind of the members that could be machined and fabricated without losing the intent of the scheme itself. So in this case, it was really important to employ computational design to enable the creation of, I guess, complex relationships that were maintained throughout the design process. So we had a model that was easily edited, that was dynamic, that gave instant feedback on the impact of design decisions, but never lost its underlying structure and ability to be turned into a fabrication model automatically. This wouldn't have been possible for me without, I guess, one of the first projects that I worked on using computational design, which was this project called South Headland Shade Structure. And it was before this project, I think this project started in 2009, I'd never touched computational design. I didn't know what it is. And then this piece called Grasshopper was released. And somehow I innately knew that it would become really important, and that to deliver projects of this type of complexity geometrically, it was going to be really important to understand it as data and really understand it as a computational kind of parametric system. And so what I learned on this project, and it was delivered, was that relationship between real material properties and digital properties, and finally construction sequences, construction processes, construction skills. And so this project, I think we delivered when I was working at the Advanced Concepts Research Centre back in 2011. I think this was delivered in 2011, if I remember correctly, and enabled, 100% enabled by the use of computational design to manage the geometry as a negotiation. Well, the project was a negotiation between geometry, material, and fabrication. Something else that's really important in transdisciplinary thinking is this idea of demystification and democratization. If you're going to share across disciplines, which we're going to see more of, you're going to need to be able to communicate across disciplines. And that means going from code to actually these types of systems that a lot of architects are familiar with now, which is this is kind of your computational design environment of Grasshopper and Dynamo, which we call visual scripting. to tools that are more, I guess, easy to access. So this example is Thornton Tomasetti, who are engineers in New York, and they're turning a lot of their expert, complex computational knowledge into very simple to use web interfaces that make sure that all of their engineers are able to access that same knowledge and use it and utilize it across the practice. And that's kind of a thing that I'm doing more and more at COX. I do less solving problems using computation and more building tools that enable other designers to access that expertise and solve their own problems, which means you get more into thinking about interfaces and interaction. Kind of the computational stuff is almost just, that is just expected. What's really important is how you ensure that the computational stuff is integrated into what we do and is more than just a niche kind of thing, because the value of it across an organization is much more important than just being vested within one or two specialists within an organization. So we do things like this, build tools that enable view analysis, so designers can do what they need to do, but they can understand immediately what the impacts are, and in this case, on views, and the value of those views when you're designing, precincts. I guess finally, what excites me about all this, and that's really important, as in this space, you need to be excited. You need to be excited about what the future holds. I'm excited about open source platforms, particularly platforms that enable us to share with one another. Sharing across disciplines, sharing across professions, organizations. This idea that we all get to learn and we get to grow, and that can only be good for the built environment. That can only be good for the people who live in the built environment and who we're responsible to. I'm really excited about data-driven design, excited about giving designers more tools to understand what the impacts of what they're doing, allowing them to do the stuff that they're really good at without being encumbered by the complexity of the tools that they have to use, exposing all this kind of tacit knowledge that exists within a computational system to the designer themselves so that they can make more informed decisions. I'm really excited about vertical integration. I'm excited about the prospect of technology connecting supply chains with construction, with fabrication, with disassembly, with circular economies. I think that's really, really cool and really something that's coming soon. I'm also excited about startups and spin-outs, all this knowledge that might have one day have at one point in time being embedded in big organizations or hidden away or not commercialized is actually out there and accessible. People are, ex-Autodesk employees are starting up companies that do certain things really, really well. Any practice, small and large, can access innovation that a decade ago would have been cutting edge and accessible to only a few. And I think this is good for the industry. It's good for the built environment. And I'm also really excited about this embrace of natural materials. I'm excited that we're seeing the prospect of more timber, more recyclable materials, circular economy stuff existing within the industry. It's not so much a fight as it was when I first started working in that space as a researcher a decade ago. People kind of want to do it now, and that's great, and that really excites me. And I'm seeing that only increasing, and I'm seeing there's an innovation imperative around that, which is really fascinating. And I guess what really excites me most is the prospect that this reality, which I've kind of outlined here, is getting closer. So this idea that within an organization you have all these disciplines together working on the same problems, bringing to bear their particular expertise without kind of communication loss, or kind of lack of transparency or fear of what someone might do with the knowledge that you have. So I see this kind of thing becoming much closer to reality. So that's the stuff that really excites me. I guess if you're interested in this stuff, for me, this is, I feel like a little bit of a reading list for me, and these are the things that have helped me change, I guess, navigate my career from, I guess, graduate who thought they would be delivering buildings in a very traditional sense to someone who is constantly having to be on the cutting edge, but also it's really important for me to be able to talk to all of my teams about what they can do today and how they can do what they're doing better. So a couple of books here that I think are really worth tracking down and looking at. So on the top left, got Super Users by Randy Deutsch, which really talks about what the future practice looks like from a sense of the kinds of skills that you might need to have. This is I think published last year. And again, that's really, it's more in the sense of the transdisciplinary practitioner. Directly below it, Bernard Caish's Projectiles, which connects computational design with kind of the idea of representation and the origins of mathematics, and actually framed computational design not as this something that's predicated on computers and technology, but is predicated on a particular way of thinking about the world and thinking about the built environment and representation within the built environment. Antoine Picon wrote a wonderful book called Digital Culture in Architecture, which is I think it's a fantastic read because it traces the history of what we do in practice, and particularly the technology that we use back 100+ years to Turing, to the kind of technology that the military were developing during World War II, and how what we do is not, I guess it's not separate or distinct or without its own histories and biases and embedded kind of assumptions, and that's really important to understand those things. Abstracting Craft by Malcolm McCullough talks about the idea of design and the idea of what it means to design, what it means to build, what the hand does, and how that translates to the mouse and the computer and different interactive or methods of interaction, but how there's a particular way that we as designers think about the world, and that we are always translating that thinking through our tools, of which the computer is just another. The Changing Shape of Practice talks about how a lot of different practices are actually moving to the future, how they are innovating, how they're integrating research, many different strategies, different business models, different outcomes. And finally, Computational Design Thinking by Akeem Menzies and Sean Elquist, which is basically a reader of really fascinating articles about, that inform or are really important to thinking about computational design. So, articles by Robin Evans about translation, and even very contemporary articles as well. But I think, for anyone who's getting into computational design or wants to understand it beyond just a series of processes or workflows or scripts, that book's fascinating, and it really situates the practice within a much larger, I guess, historical and theoretical framework, which for me has been really important to ground my own practice. So that's kind of, thank you. I think that's a lot. And like I said, this is the first time I've delivered this one, but I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. Hopefully there was some interesting stuff there, and I guess I just wanted to really almost talk about, I guess, my own personal approaches to all of this stuff, because it is incredibly fascinating to me, and it's always changing as well. So yeah, thank you very much.
And thank you so much, Tristan. Thanks for sharing your valuable insight with us. You depicted a trajectory for us very well, how technology is going to impact, our profession now and in near future. So fantastic. I guess there's no doubt why Tristan received the WA Future Leader of the Year Design Award in 2019. So that was really, I guess, informative. Thanks, much appreciated for that.
Thanks, Teresa. So it was a bit longer than I wanted it to be. Apologies.
No, I guess that was perfect. We have actually 5 to 10 more minutes. If you don't mind, we can open that to participants if they have any specific question for you. So anyone has any question? You can use your microphone or you can just type your questions. Sally?
I'm interested in how you echoing in my head, sorry. Interested in how you translate your technology to the users through the in your workplace, because I find there's a lot of intrinsic, fantastic wisdom and knowledge in probably the older generations that must be hard to deal with that interface, or I personally am heading that way and find it hard to deal with that interface. So what are your comments there? How does that go?
It is a challenge, and I think that's, for me, has been the most interesting thing, because you make assumptions, particularly when you're in a computational designer and you're working in this kind of technologically driven space. You make assumptions about the way people think and the way people work, and increasingly it's been really important to my practice that it's about creating tools that are easy to use and provide avenues for people to access that information without altering the way that they traditionally think or work. So I guess with a lot of kind of directors and people who, I guess, have a more traditional experience in terms of the tools that they use, it's less about saying, oh, here, use this system, and more about how do we make it as easy as possible for you to communicate what you need and have the tool either via yourselves or someone operating it to actually embed that knowledge in it as easily as possible. So rather than trying to get people's practice to change, you actually need to make sure that the tool or the process is responsive to that practice. And it's been much more possible in the last 3 or 4 years, because a lot more research has been going into that space. So there are ways that we can do it now that we probably couldn't do 5 years ago. And I think it is because a lot of the technicians and technologists who were previously working with other technicians and technologists are actually working with a lot of other people now, because it is so much more mainstream.
Yeah, I think that's kind of key to, I guess also your comments on learning from the past, and I think that's overlooked a lot in our current environment, that there is a lot of wisdom and knowledge out there that is sort of brushed away from the main crime of people getting older and is overlooked. And I think if you can access that knowledge and translate it, then that's really worthwhile. That's my comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess Ben Stevens have asked a question, and then Francesco. Ben has asked, you mentioned equity and equality. Do you have concerns about the commercialization of industry for working against public access to technology and equal opportunity?
Yeah, in short, yes, I do. I think, the open source movement has been fantastic in providing a lot of knowledge out there. There are also a lot of operators in the industry 4.0 space, I guess, who are sharing their stuff. It's quite amazing what people do share out there. But I think for every kind of person, for every benevolent kind of party, there are also those who are very much more concerned with IP protection than they are about the other things. And I think, I find this a lot in architecture as well, this idea of what IP might actually be and how you protect it. And a lot of people think that the IP is in the tool that they make, not necessarily the people that they have in their organization who are able to leverage that tool or that knowledge. And some of the more innovative practices, like BVN, for instance, have actually taken the position, well, you know what? No one else is going to use that knowledge as well as we are, or at least particularly as well as we are within our particular context and our particular business model. So we're open sourcing everything, right? We're developing stuff. Feel free to use it, make of it what you will. It's not going to really impact our business because we have a particular strategy that you don't have. So it becomes more about your strategic thinking and your ability to foster the best people within your organizations, and less about trying to protect litigiously IP and commercial opportunities in that way.
Thank you. Thanks, Tristan. Francesco? Francesco, are you there?
I'm here. Sorry, I wasn't muted. I was muted. Thanks, Tristan. I was just saying, I will keep the most theoretical questions for me. I just say that I really love the idea to overlap the two concepts of transdisciplinarity and plausibility there. And you know, I think that if you have a conversation around the four scenarios that Arab have presented, the dynamicity of the cone of plausibility in time is certainly subject to explore more, how the cone of plausibility changes over time. So we are constantly repositioning that vertex of that cone. But I will ask a different question that I think might be of great interest for some of us. I think that this is triggered by the previous question that I found incredibly interesting. Educational providers like universities might be agents to offer platforms, open platforms, to develop knowledge and understanding of all of this emerging reality, not only just to prepare everyone, but to let everyone in. And I'm referring also to what Sally said. So I wonder if you would consider this a plausible future within the range, a wide range of possibilities within the cone in education. But we are discussing this right now in DBE to build a platform that is open and offers opportunities exactly to enhance access and equality, learning all of this and being more acquainted with this emerging. It's a cultural paradigm shift. So it is very, very important that we all get familiar with this and we are equipped in every reality. I think that this will have an impact in every reality on this planet. It doesn't matter if it is South Africa or Australia or Central Europe or China or South America, for that matters. So I think that would be really a conversation I would like to have with you if you're interested and if you can build interest on that.
Yeah, sure. Look, and I agree, Francesco. I think that it reminds me of something I was having a chat about yesterday. But this COVID and what it's done in terms of conferences not being able to run and all this kind of stuff, it's incredible how much it has actually spurred the open sharing of knowledge that might not otherwise have been shared. So you're seeing YouTube presentations that are openly accessible that might have been hidden behind a feed or something. Papers being published, open access. We're all now as connected to one another as as we've ever been, because it's all digital, which means we're also able to have those conversations that we might not have been able to have before. So I've been really excited by what that suggests, because it's actually not that hard. And in fact, it's amazing how much people are willing to share when paradigms shift.
Yeah. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I think we'd better wrap up the session because people might have another online meeting challenge with our virtual board now. But once again, thank you so much, Tristan. And
thanks,
we're looking forward to seeing you next semester. I think we'll be working on the studios together. So hopefully we'll continue the discussion and looking forward to see you then.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation and I really enjoyed speaking.
No worries. Tristan. So while people are here, I just quickly announce our next Architalk, which will happen on 10th of June. And our next Architalker will be John Wardell Architects. So joining us from Melbourne, and their topic is reconfiguring architectural practice. So basically they will talk about our new DBE building, which will be quite exciting. So I would invite you all to attend that one, and I will. I have already sent the invite through your calendars. So please feel free to join, and looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you all. Bye. Bye for now. Thanks everyone for attending.